Sometimes you play a game that just overall seems bad or is merely average, but somehow it still keeps you interested in playing through it. Like God Mode, for instance, an arena-based third-person shooter with an interesting setting. While average at best, it still offered a fun combat loop that kept me entertained for a while. Every so often, this uniqueness of the game makes it worthwhile and a fun but flawed experience. As is the instance with Collapse, where the gameplay, soundtrack and that good itch of Eurojank kept me playing until the end. While other times, despite the best efforts of the game, it's just not enjoyable. Which is sadly the case with Brink, a multiplayer first-person shooter that tried to revitalize class-based shooters with unique movement, customizations and various gadgets, but still failed due to various issues and clunky controls. But what is Hydrophobia? Other than being the fear of water, Hydrophobia is also a third-person survival adventure game. It was originally released for the Xbox 360 and PS3 in 2010, simply named Hydrophobia. In 2011, it was renamed as Hydrophobia Prophecy when it was released on the PC. It was created by an indie studio called Dark Energy Digital, which was formed from members of another studio called Blade Interactive. Both of the studios were located in the United Kingdom. Whatever happened to the original studio, Blade Interactive, I'm unsure of. But considering their last game was from 2009, I doubt they're still around. In 2012, Dark Energy Digital was shut down, having only released 2 games, one of them being Hydrophobia, and the other being WSC Real 11 World Snooker Championship. The company was then forced to sell the IP and assets of Hydrophobia, as well as the engine used for the game. Whoever owns the right for the game and engine, I do not know. The engine itself, named Hydro Engine, was in development for over 3 years. Supposedly, it was designed with the ability to model flowing water. Since it's entirely dynamic, it meant that each effect would be different each time. It was also capable of interacting with physics, such as the Havoc engine, to create believable interactions for objects in the water, combined with the development platform called Infinite World, which itself was in development for 5 years. This allowed the engine and platform to work together in order to create game projects with the power of the engine in focus. For 2010, this was, and actually still is, a very impressive engine when it comes to making believable water, and it is still the #1 selling point for the game. Upon its release on the consoles, it received poor reviews and negative feedback due to various issues with the game. The devs wanted to address this and went on about trying to fix the game the best they could. They did this by going through all the reviews and feedback and listed out those that were useful and those that were not. The fixes was then released in a large update titled Hydrophobia Pure. The update contained fixes and enhancements to almost every aspect of the game. It was then released on Steam as Hydrophobia Prophecy, which can be described as Hydrophobia 1.5. But what's the game actually like? The gameplay is a mix of platforming, combat, and environmental interactions that usually involve water to some extent. While the platforming in general is fine and does its job, it's still quite janky and you'll have issues throughout the game. For example, in one section while climbing, a cutscene will play a scripted section, and if you aren't aligned correctly, you'll die in said cutscene. Another issue occurs if you don't have VSync enabled. You can't grab onto certain ledges and can't progress. It is thankfully fixed by enabling VSync. In order to prevent you from being completely lost, the game also has a 2D and a 3D map that gives you an overview of the room and areas. However, it isn't easy to get lost in the first place, therefore I never found a use for the map, as I always knew where to go. This is also because your PDA can show you the direction you need to go. For all the fixes and updates the developers did, there's still a large amount of bugs, glitches and issues with the game, which sours the experience. Just a few of these issues include enemies spawning right in front of you, cutscenes not ending, and much more. However, despite all these issues, one of the biggest is the terrible camera controls. It will always try to align itself to the torso of the player character. This will be caused by any action that changes the position of the character, such as going up and down stairs or getting underwater. This will create sections where the camera simply flips out. This quickly becomes annoying and frustrating, and definitely needed more time being fixed. The actual combat in the game is fine, but it's clear that it isn't an upfront shooter, as your character is extremely vulnerable and will lose in an upfront confrontation. But the load times are extremely quick, and you'll get back into the action in no time. Thankfully though, the enemies will also die fairly quickly with a well-placed shot to the head. And the game provides various ways for you to eliminate the enemies without having to risk your own life. Whenever combat moves underwater, it's more about the movement and figuring out where the enemies are and juggling your air supply, as the generic cover system has been removed with a more 360-degree movement. The gun itself is also fairly unique. Instead of having multiple weapons, you simply change ammo for your pistol, where each type have a distinct use. Some ammo types are more frequent and readily available than others, so you won't be using them throughout the entire game. Your standard ammo type, however, is infinite, but at a disadvantage. To do any significant amount of damage, you need to charge the shot. It is also used to shoot underwater and used for dealing with environmental obstacles. While the different types are an interesting idea and fun to mess around with, you're still able to complete almost the entire game simply using the standard ammunition. The environmental interactions generally focus around solving an issue that prevents you from proceeding. These are usually solved by interacting with water in various different ways. While not amazingly difficult or revolutionary, they still give you an opportunity to see the water in effect. The game will upon multiple occasions take use of the PDA. This can either be to find hidden messages, open doors, access cameras and open doors through said camera, or a hacking minigame that consists of aligning frequencies in a 30-second time window. Whenever you switch to the PDA, you enter a first-person perspective and can still move around the given vicinity, if you aren't doing something else, like the hacking. It's not amazing, but a fun little addition to the game. Arguably the most unique and underused feature is the ability to control the water. With this, you're able to create a wall of water in which you can pick up items and throw them, either around in an environmental puzzle or at the enemies. The biggest issue is that it's introduced in the last 10 minutes of the game, which leaves out huge potential for the interactions that it could have been. If the powers were introduced from the start of the game, it would have allowed the players to mess more around with it, instead of teasing the player throughout the entire game, only for it to be used in the literal last minutes of the game. Another idea could have been that when the players complete the game for the first time, they could have been allowed to use the powers from the very start. This could have given the game some replayability, as messing around with the powers is a lot of fun. This is merely wishful thinking, but I personally think it would have been much more interesting than what we got in the game. Supposedly, the game was going to be released in 3 episodes, but considering we never saw the 2 other games, chances of getting a continuation of the game is slim or non-existing. Perhaps it would have been better if the 3 games were instead one single game. This way, we would have gotten a complete story, and at the same time, also more time to mess around with the powers, or even introduce more variations on said power. Nevertheless, it's sad to see that we'll never get a real ending to the game. Throughout the levels, the game will score you on the various actions you do, and then at the end of each level, will show you the stats of how well you did. What this score is used for, other than bragging rights towards your friends that most likely have never played this game, I do not know. Besides the main story, you also have a challenge room that will be unlocked when you finish the main story. Considering the game isn't fairly long, it won't take you long to unlock this mode. This mode is essentially a combat scenario, where you have to kill waves and waves of enemies trying to gain a higher score. You're also given the powers to mess around with, and while fun, it is a shame that you can't run around testing the powers out in various different environments. Still, it is a fun distraction and entertaining enough, but it's over in less than an hour. While the game looks a bit dated by today's standards, it still looks quite good. The visuals still have a charm to them. For a game from 2011, it could have looked much worse. The water looks great, and it's awesome to see how fluid the water moves around. While not realistic, it does look believable, and it's just mesmerizing to see it move around, and since water is present almost all the time, you have plenty of time to do just that. It's certainly no wonder where most of the development time was spent. The various effects that are shown throughout the game as the ship is getting more and more destroyed also still look great, and helps to make the areas look more lively and active. The game does a quite good job of displaying a ship taking in more and more water and receiving more and more damage. Where a simple room might have looked decent, the addition of various different effects throughout the area makes it that more interesting and lively. The game's visuals and camera angles remind me of earlier Tomb Raider games, that being Tomb Raider Anniversary, Tomb Raider Legend, and Tomb Raider Underworld to be exact. And I suspect there might have been a bit of inspiration from those games, but I don't know for sure. One of the minor problems the visual have is that each level and area looks fairly similar and there isn't enough variety. If the game had some unique areas while still implementing water. For example, have a level set outside the ship or on top of it. Just something to switch up the hallways and rooms that just look so similar. It would have been incredibly interesting to see what they could have created if they just went for something else than hallways and rooms. An issue is that if you didn't know that you are on a ship, you wouldn't have been able to tell. That is not to say that the levels can't still feel unique. And at the same time, the fact that the levels feel so similar, you avoid the issue of having levels that just don't seem to be able to connect in a believable way. Whether or not it was planned for more unique levels in the later episodes is left up to speculation. What we have are fine levels, but are somewhat repetitive in the style. The main character looks great and stands out from the rest of the characters in the game, as well as her animations being smooth and great. The rest of the characters in the game, while fine, are either repeatedly used throughout the game or only seen once or twice. The game is booming with sound effects almost from the very start. This helps sell the effect that the ship is slowly being destroyed and sunken. The issue is that sometimes these sound effects are too loud and you can't hear anything else. Unfortunately, this can't be solved by lowering the audio, as it is a single slider for the sound effect. The water itself sounds rather, well, wet, and it makes the water feel more believable. You can hear the rushing of water when you open a door, or a wall breaks in and water flows into the room. It all adds up to make the water again more believable, and for the most part, it works. Some sound effects are more annoying though, like the constant heartbeat that you hear when you're underwater, combined with the voices that, if I recall correctly, fits together to the main character's backstory and why she's afraid of water, which is an interesting way to tell it, but the amount of times you're underwater makes it annoying. If it had been playing less frequently, it wouldn't have been this annoying. The guns overall sound lackluster and are barely audible compared to the background sound effects and music. Because of this, you'll sometimes not notice that enemies are shooting at you before the red marker appears. The music is fine, but no part of the soundtrack was rather memorable. It was not a terrible soundtrack, it did fit the scenarios, but didn't do anything unique. Another issue is that since there's only one or two tracks, they do become repetitive. The voice acting overall was fine. The main character was the best in the game, as he's portrayed as rather believable and does an excellent job at sounding genuinely frightened, but still sounding confident. In regards to the various enemies, I almost never heard them say anything, as their voices were muffled, the same way the gun sounds were suppressed by the music and sound effects. The other important characters in the game also had great voice acting and fit their roles quite well. One bug regarding audio that I did notice is that if you manage to die by drowning, you'll still be able to hear the character drowning when you reload the checkpoint. The story was never really a strong point of the game, but it is there to give the players a narrative goal to work towards, albeit one that is never finished. In this story, the world has seen a massive increase in population. In the game, it's called the Great Population Flood, which has caused a lot of chaos in the world. The main character, Kate Wilson, a system engineer, is aboard a city-sized luxury ocean vessel called the Queen of the World. It is not long into the game before the ship is bombed by a terrorist organization called the Malthusians, led by their fanatical leader, Miller. They have a plan of killing a large number of people in order to lower the population of the planet. It is then up to Kate to stop the Malthusians from executing their plan. The story does try and explain why you get the powers And while a bit lacking in explanation, it's still a decent reason to why your character gets set powers. You can find notes scattered throughout the game to read more about the story, but nothing amazingly in depth. Nothing is really explained at the end of the game. It literally just ends on a cliffhanger. You completed the end boss, congrats, the end. I'm actually a bit unsure if it was a cliffhanger, or the team just ran out of money and time, and decided this was the best way for them to end the game. In conclusion, despite the efforts from the developers to make the game more polished and fixed, it's still a hot mess. But behind that mess lies an amazing display of water physics and mechanics that's just so damn fun to mess around with. I have a hard time recommending this game to anyone. Despite the fun times I had in it, there are blatant issues with the game, and it's short. It took me less than 4 hours to complete. The game feels unpolished and it's unfinished, and plays more like a tech demo for the water physics than a fully fledged game. The best thing the game has to offer is the mentioned water mechanics, and how well it still functions, and just how fun it is to look at. I'd advise you against buying the game, but if you want to mess around with the water mechanics yourself, I can't blame you. If that's the case, try and see if you can't get it on sale. My name is Bernard Alexander Larsen, and thanks for watching. Hello everyone. This probably won't be a usual thing I do at the end of the videos, but in this case I felt it was needed, after my long period of time without any videos. Thank you so much for being patient with me. I can't tell you how important that is. There were so many different things going on that prevented me from finishing a video. For example, my HDD dying, my last microphone literally shitting itself, Corona, and other stuff in real life that just came in the way. But I'm thankful for having finally released this video, and hopefully it was worth waiting for. I'll try to see if I can't make the next one a bit faster. And what game might that be? Well, you can take a guess.
You're our last best chance to keep history intact, so no pressure, buddy.